11 degrees below zero right now in Chicago. And take a look behind me. You can see the vapor rising.
Have you ever wondered what's behind those unexpected blasts of freezing air that sometimes hit us? It's actually due to something called the polar vortex. This is a huge whirl of cold air, usually minding its own business up in the Arctic. But sometimes it gets pushed south, and that's when we start to feel it. It can literally freeze your skin in minutes. In 2019, we lost 21 people to an outbreak of this icy beast. Now the polar vortex isn't anything new. It's been there for ages, spinning around the north and south poles. But here's where it gets tricky. Some scientists think that climate change could be shaking things up. They're worried that our warming planet could make the polar vortex more unstable, which might lead to serious problems. Let's explore this. Have you ever wondered how the polar vortex works? Well, it's a cool process. The vortex is always spinning counterclockwise around the North Pole. In the summer months, it stays closer to the North Pole, but in winter, it moves a bit further south. That's something called the polar front at the bottom edge of the vortex. It is also known as the polar jet stream, and it moves from west to east. That's why the northeastern parts of North America often get the harshest polar vortex weather. Jet streams are pushed forward by temperature differences and the rotation of Earth. The bigger the temperature gap, the faster the winds. These jet streams fly high, about 30,000 feet off the ground, the same altitude as aeroplanes. Pilots love to ride these streams to go faster and save fuel. Plus, they can bring weather changes like cold fronts and heat waves.
Typically, it has winds contained within it over 150 miles an hour, as strong as some of the most powerful hurricanes on the Earth's surface.
Here's an interesting tidbit from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They say that a strong polar jet stream that follows the same latitude as the vortex makes it more stable. It helps to keep the super cold Arctic air up in the Arctic. But sometimes the polar jet stream weakens and starts to wave around the globe. The waviness lets warmer air move north and cold Arctic air rush south. So if you ever wonder how does the polar vortex affect temperatures down here in the United States? Well, it's all about how cold air moves. You see, near the North Pole, it's dark all the time during the winter, and this allows a lot of cold air to build up. Sometimes this cold air stays put near the poles, and we get to enjoy milder weather down here in the US. But even now and then, the jet stream dips south and drags some of that chilly Arctic air down toward us. This usually happens when the stratospheric polar vortex stretches down from the poles, or when a piece of the vortex breaks off and heads towards the United States. This is when the polar vortex can really make things cold for us.
Come on, buddy. Do your business. Come on, go on. Because Daddy's still wearing shorts. Because in my heart, it's still summer. What? Stop judging me.
Now, you might be wondering how often this happens. Well, it varies. In a typical winter, we might see one or two instances where the polar vortex gets seriously out of shape. Some winters, it doesn't happen much at all, while in others, it could happen several times. But usually, it's one or two episodes per winter. When it does happen, it's noticeable. We get a few days where a big chunk of the country feels the deep freeze. So that's how the polar vortex can influence our temperatures here in the US. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? Now don't think this is just some imaginative weather phenomenon. The polar vortex is very real, and has shown its might on several occasions. Let's go through some instances to give you a clearer picture. First off, who can forget the winter storm of February 2021? That was a big one. Texas got hit hard with the most impactful winter storm in its history. We're talking tens of billions of dollars in damages. Tragically, over 200 people lost their lives. This happened because the polar vortex stretched far south, which funneled frigid Arctic air all the way down into Texas. And it wasn't a quick chill either. Some of the biggest cities in Texas were below freezing for over a week. Moreover, the winter of 2018 to 2019 was also marked by a polar vortex event. The vortex was disrupted and the cold air spilled out over North America. This led to some of the coldest temperatures on record, from places like the Midwest, with temperatures in Illinois dropping down to a bitter -38 degrees Fahrenheit. So, you see, the polar vortex isn't just a cool weather term. It has real impacts, sometimes serious, on life down here in the US. Then in 2015 to 2016, the polar vortex was back at it again. It seemed to say, "Hold my beer, I'm not done yet." This winter saw a third strong polar vortex that brought bone-chilling air to the United States, setting new records for cold temperatures in many parts of the country. This time, the vortex got creative and introduced us to the Polar Vortex Express. Now, this wasn't a fun train ride. Instead, it was a swift delivery of Arctic air that sped across the country, making a special delivery to the East Coast. Residents there had to bundle up as cold air engulfed the region. Now, let's take a step back to January 2014. That was another time when the polar vortex really made its presence felt. The vortex weakened and split, sending cold Arctic air southward. The result? Well, it's remembered as a North American cold wave, where places like Chicago felt colder than Mars. Our Earth goes through the dance with the polar vortex every winter, and these are just a few of the major instances we've shared. The vast and chilling world of the polar vortex holds many more intriguing stories. So, if your curiosity is now piqued and you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, or explore other fascinating phenomena that our world has to offer, how about hitting that subscribe button below? Trust me, it's a decision you won't regret. We know that climate change is causing the Earth to warm up, right? But here's the kicker. Not all parts of the Earth are warming up at the same rate. The Arctic, for instance, is heating up twice as fast as the global average. This is a phenomenon known as the Arctic amplification. Now, this difference in warming rates affects the polar front. Polar front is basically the boundary between the cold air from the poles and the warmer air from the equator. When the Arctic air warms faster than the equator, it makes this boundary less defined and causes the polar jet stream to become wavier and slower.
But I believe the odds are that we can expect, as a result of global warming, to see more of this pattern of extreme cold in the mid-latitudes.
This waviness of the polar jet stream can lead to what we call a meandering polar vortex. It's a less of a tight circle around the pole and more of a winding path that can dip far down into the lower latitudes, bringing that Arctic chill with it. So, in a way, climate change can make the polar vortex events more intense and potentially more frequent. This means we could see more episodes of extreme cold in places that are typically milder, even as the overall climate continues to warm. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? Anyway, we're going to wrap things up here. But if you enjoyed our whirlwind tour into the chilly heart of the polar vortex, give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, let's keep this conversation going. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced the icy grip of the polar vortex? We'd love to hear your frosty tales. So, we'll see you in the next video.